Sea of Solitude is a charming but heavy-handed tale of one girl's journey to deal with her guilt and loneliness as she ventures through a beautifully stylized world. Those who have played through and enjoyed titles like Rhyme, Journey, Absu, and What Remains of Edith Finch, amongst others, will find themselves right in their comfort zone with Sea of Solitude, even if it's a bit more on the nose than those games. From here out, this video will contain spoilers. I won't be going through the story in detail, but if you want to go in fresh, don't watch the rest of this video until you've completed the game. Sea of Solitude really grabbed my attention at E3 2018 when Cornelia Geppert took the stage at EA Play and nervously but passionately introduced the world to her and her team's game. Her words on the nature of loneliness were striking as she explained the game had a story that everyone could relate to in some facet simply because feeling alone is something all humans have experienced at some point.
When humans get too lonely, they turn into monsters. This is at the core of everything you will see, hear, and hopefully feel while playing SOS. What makes this underlying concept so important and so unique is that nearly every human being can at least somehow relate to or remember the feeling of being lonely.
Loneliness ended up being the driving concept that fueled the game's development, and while it shines through generously in terms of being a narrative theme, it doesn't always mesh as well with the gameplay you engage with throughout the title. Still, Sea of Solitude ends up being a game worth experiencing, and let me tell you why that is. So welcome to Full Hearts and Heavy Hands, my review of Sea of Solitude. Normally, I would say this is a narrative-focused game, so I should start by discussing that. However, Sea of Solitude is so breathtaking visually that I can't help but to discuss presentation a bit first. The art design is fairly stylized, and I love the character designs of the monsters, but the most striking component of it would be the color palette the game employs, as the blue waves of the ocean contrast starkly with the orange and yellow hues of buildings in the most beautiful way possible. The game swaps out its color palettes a few times though, as the usage of colors reflects the protagonist Kay's current mindset. Sometimes the world becomes shrouded in black when she is depressed, or covered in a beige filter so that the normal vibrant colors don't take away from the memory that Kay is recalling at the time. Color is one of the big indicators for what Kay is currently experiencing emotionally and mentally throughout the journey, and I think this is what makes the game so visually compelling. The art style and the usage of color are directly tied to our hero's plight. In terms of audio, I'd say the game is a bit more average. Sound effects are realistic and spot on, while the music very much takes a backseat gig on this journey. Most of it is ambient music that helps to build the atmosphere and suck the player into this world. It's clearly designed with a purpose, so it's absolutely alright that none of the pieces are very memorable because they really aren't trying to be. Voice acting is an interesting component for American English speakers, as the spoken language here is English, but it does feature a noticeable German accent.
Hey! Are you alright?
Kay! You're here again!
How do you know who I am?
What a silly question. Here, I have a present for you.
Now this really isn't a complaint, as I can't see how this very small indie studio in Germany would have had any way to get voice lines read in each native language despite the help from EA. In fact, in the credits you can see that one of the developers was also a voice actor, meaning that they had to do some of the recordings on their own. But like I said earlier, it's not really an issue because it's good to see some diversity amongst games. However, you should be aware that it's going to be just a bit striking at first. What's really meant to strike the player in Sea of Solitude, though, is its narrative, and I'm a bit torn on it. The story is centered around Kay, a 20-something-year-old university student who is dealing with feelings of loneliness after getting out of a relationship. It seems that Kay's relationship with her boyfriend was driving most of her life, and once it left, she didn't have much to fall back on, which left her feeling bitter and hollow. The game is about Kay's journey to recognize her shortcomings, make amends to those around her, and come to peace with her various emotions. Again, I'm trying to keep it vague here as the narrative is the game's bread and butter, so bear with me. The world is a fictionalized representation of Kay's feelings. It's almost like a dream world where people who are lonely transform into monsters. Unless you're this dude, then you just become a big lizard. This transformation is an external representation of the person's inner turmoil, and it's something that has begun to plague Kay. At the beginning of the game, she literally is revealed to be a monster, meaning that she too has succumbed to her negative emotion. From there, the journey is about getting Kay back to normal while exploring many themes relating to mental health, such as loneliness, guilt, depression, and anger that can stem from the conflicts that we have with the people closest to us. Kay's journey then is not only about helping herself, but also helping others, whether that means learning to support them or learning to let go. It's themes that every human can relate to. I'm conflicted about the narrative though, because while the game's themes are relatable, the fact remains that the game's story doesn't give the player much room to piece things together or interpret events for themselves. The story is an emotional one, yet it certainly feels forced, as just about every component is explained in detail to the player so that there is no room to wiggle your own experiences into it. It's a story that every person can relate to, but it's so defined and rigid that it struggles to create a real connection that games like Journey or Rime may create. For me, it has caused some conflict on my perception of the game, but not enough to make me dislike it. However, I think it's something other players need to be aware of before buying. There's a defined story, and before you can even ask one question about that story, the game has probably already answered it. Most of this comes down to the fact that the game's writing is very heavy-handed, meaning that you're going to understand what is going on at all times because it's being told to you directly. Characters and their motivations are never left ambiguous, and sometimes the game's writing really beats you over the head with what exactly is happening. The lead developer, Cornelia Geppert, said it herself. This game's story is easily connected to by just about any person, so the need to explain every detail is just a bit off-putting, as if they didn't want anyone to get lost in the story. At the same time, a lot of the sentence structure is very basic, with a few lines repeated at multiple points throughout the game. Players will personally have to decide if the presentation of the story is a strength or weakness for themselves, but even though I don't think it's perfectly executed, I'm still okay with the fact that they decided to tell their own story, even if I don't think it makes the 4-hour game very replayable. It has some heartfelt moments for sure, some of which really hit home depending on your personal experiences with family and love. There are genuinely some good lessons to take from this game, and it's a story that's worth experiencing. When it comes to gameplay though, I can't really say the same, as most of it feels like something to do while hearing the next story bit or working your way towards the next major plot point. I will say they did their best to make the gameplay mechanics a reflection of the themes, as most often you'll be collecting black corruption gas that poisons the bright spots guiding your journey. Interestingly enough, for a game about loneliness, Kay sure does spend a lot of time in this game talking to characters or personified glowing balls of light. A lot of the gameplay comes down to walking or solving very light puzzle elements that never really challenge the player. In fact, calling them puzzles is kind of a stretch, as you won't find anything here that infuriates you or even makes you think that much. The puzzles are pretty much always smooth sailing. Get it? Because you drive a boat a lot in this game? There's a few different types of puzzles, and the game shuffles through them regularly, and they're over so fast that they never become tedious or overstay their welcome. Most of them are just used to pace the story a bit, and that's fine. I kinda hate when games like this introduce elaborate puzzles when all they want to do is move on to the next story bit. One thing that I greatly appreciated was that Kay always carries a flare that can be used to identify where the player must go next, which was super useful in the 4 or 5 times that I wasn't exactly sure what to do. Besides that, you can also take the time to collect clue bottles with notes that enrich the story, or shoo away birds in case you ever wanted to do that in a game. Overall, the gameplay is just kinda there, but in a game this entrenched in its narrative, I think that's fine. So I hope this brief review didn't end up sounding too critical of the game, because Sea of Solitude is very much a case of being more than the sum of its parts. In the last few years, so many games have been designed to keep players logging in every single day to complete endless tasks and level up battle passes, and it's sometimes nice to get a break from all of that and experience a story that is digestible and heartfelt, and that's what Sea of Solitude offers. It's a beautifully stylized world with a meaningful story that isn't botched by gameplay that gets in the way. Sea of Solitude knows what it is and doesn't try to stretch out its runtime to drastic levels with long stretches of gameplay. It doubles down on its story, and even though it's a bit on the nose, it still feels human and is easy to connect to. With all that being said, I do recommend this game to you from one human to another. However, I may consider waiting for a price drop if you're strapped for cash, but don't forget about this game. It's worth the time, it's worth the money, and it's worth the energy, and Sea of Solitude is already my personal frontrunner for Indie Game of the Year. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing for more, follow me on Twitter at NopNapNarp, and as always, have a nice day, and take care.